Just to introduce myself, a little bit about me. Many years ago, I did a lot of paddling. Started off in UCD, in the UCD Canoe Club, way back in the dim and distant. Did a couple of liffies, a couple of buoyings, that kind of thing. Took myself off to the sea. Used to do quite a lot of kayaking around the east coast. That was unfortunately a while ago, but as Sam said to me a week or so ago, once a paddler, never always a paddler. You never really forget. The last time, a couple of years ago, last time I went paddling was a trip from Thurles down to Waterford on the shore with my brother and a Canadian. So it was quite a bit of fun. I work full-time for the RNLI. I'm the water safety lead for Ireland, so my job is to do this kind of thing and engage with as many people as we can, as many organisations as we can, in terms of increasing people's awareness of the risk, awareness of safety, educating people in terms of what they can do to help themselves to stay out of trouble, and if they do get into trouble, what to do, and so on. About a year ago, I retired after 16 years on Wicklow Lifeboat. So I've seen quite a lot of the difficulties that can happen from the rescue side as well. So what I'm going to do tonight is kind of share some of our experience and our advice in terms of safety around paddling, some of the kit. But I'm going to look very much on the why rather than just carry this and carry that. It's why, and particularly from the point of view of the RNLI and the Coast Guard in terms of rescue and that type of thing, why some of this kit is so important and why it makes life a bit easier for us. Then I'm also going to go through later on a little bit about what happens when you call for help. What are the mechanics behind it? And hopefully at that stage you'll see why some of that kit can be so important and why it's quite useful. So kicking off then, just in terms of a little bit of general, the RNLI, I'm sure most of you are familiar, are well known for running a lifeboat service. And in parts of the UK and Northern Ireland, we actually run the lifeguarding service as well. But we've been involved in areas of accident prevention and areas of safety advice for many years. The old barometer there in one of those photographs, we started to introduce those over 100 years ago at lifeboat stations, and that was around giving local fishermen some idea of weather and so on. But we've also branched out certainly over the last 20 years in terms of attending events, doing life jacket clinics, giving safety advice, one-to-one safety advice with people who are familiar with activities. So you can see there's a kayaker and one of our people having a chat about safety kit. And we also have a lot of other initiatives going with other organisations. So, for example, there's the kids there with the Swim Safe cap on. That's an initiative that we run with Swim England and Swim Ireland. Unfortunately, this year, with the current circumstances, a lot of the activities have been postponed until next year. But that's the kind of thing that we're involved in, as well as the rescue side. So I'm just going to show you this slide here. Don't worry about the fact that it's rather old and it's UK, but 16 fatalities in that 3-year period. And the real question, I suppose, and this is what was a wake-up call to us in terms of the kind of conversations we need to be having with paddlers. How many of those people do you think were able to call for themselves? Well, the answer is actually none of them. None of the people who actually died were able to make that call themselves. Some other interesting statistics around it was 87% were male, nearly 63% occurred on a Sunday, probably not surprising, weekends. 90% involved in capsize, 31% of people were on their own, and 83% had a buoyancy aid. So just some statistics around that. I suppose one of the questions that people ask is, who do accidents happen to? Well, actually, accidents happen to pretty much everybody. In our experience, and certainly in my experience on the lifeboat crew and working for 20 years in the whole area of water safety, is it happens to everybody. It happens to beginners, it happens to experienced people. I suppose one of the differences when it happens to experienced people, when they have incidents, they tend to be better prepared, they're trained, they know what to do, and they're carrying a lot of the right kind of equipment and so on. But accidents do happen at the end of the day. And what we're trying to do here is reduce the severity of those accidents if they do occur, and obviously at the end of the day we provide that rescue service as well. So moving on, there's 6 messages which we believe are very important, and you'll be familiar with these in terms of some of the messages you've seen with Canoeing Ireland as well, because we've shared a lot of this kind of thing. We've discussed it. Going to go into some of these in a bit more detail, but it's carrying a means of communication and keeping it within reach. That's very, very important. Another thing is always wear a PFD. We'll look at that in a little bit more detail as well. That is checking weather and tides. That's quite important for a number of reasons. First of all, there's the safety, but secondly, there's the enjoyment part of it as well. Tell somebody where you're going, very, very important, and we'll look at some of the things around that as well in a bit more detail. Wearing the appropriate clothing and kit. We'll talk a little bit about why certain things are important and so on. And obtaining appropriate training, that's extremely important as well, especially if you're new to the activity. Apart from the lovely thing about training is, and I operate as a coach and a trainer in another water sport discipline at the moment, but the important thing is, apart from the fact that you'll learn a bit about safety, you'll also learn how to enjoy it more. So extremely important. So let's have a look at carrying a means of calling for help and keeping it within reach. So I suppose, that's one of the questions. What means of calling for help do you carry, and where do you keep it? They're the important things. So let's look at a couple of the most common type of means of raising the alarm. Personal locator beacon. These are becoming very, very popular, and I would certainly highly recommend something like this. They're around about the 230-ish euro mark. You can get them with GPS or without GPS. The cost difference is very little. We'd strongly recommend getting one with a GPS chip in it. So how it works basically is that you will need to manually deploy it, but effectively what you do is you manually deploy it, you press the button, and what that does is, because it's registered to you, it lets the emergency services know who you are, and because if you're using one with a GPS chip, it tells exactly where you are. So we know who you are and we know where you are. And the lovely thing about, anybody in the search and rescue community will tell you, the lovely thing about knowing where you are is it takes the search out of search and rescue. We can go exactly to that point and pick you up. So that would be something that I think would be very, very useful to have on you. It is only for use in an emergency, but it will alert the emergency services. How it works in very brief detail is it sends a signal up to a satellite. That satellite returns that signal to a local user terminal, which for Europe is actually based in Racing in Germany. That's automatically decoded in terms of where the location is and where it's registered, and that will send a message through to the local Marine Rescue Coordination Centre. So in, say, the East Coast, for example, if you set off a PLB, within about 6 seconds, that signal will arrive in the Marine Rescue Coordination Centre in Dublin, and they will immediately activate the emergency services on that. So that's the personal locator beacon, something which is extremely useful. Handheld VHF, again, extremely useful from the point of view of you're able to talk to somebody. One of the great things about handheld VHF as well is that you're actually talking to everybody who's within range. So, if you happen to be out there and you get into trouble, as well as talking to the Coast Guard, there might be a boat or somebody else who's only a short distance away, maybe around the headland or something, who picks it up and knows where you are and knows you're in trouble and can come out and help you ahead of somebody else, because they're on the spot. So it's really, really useful from that point of view. There's one other really, really important thing about VHF. And any of you that have been out on the water, and if you've had your VHF, and if you've been in an area where there's actually a rescue taking place, very often you'll hear the lifeboat asking the person to do a slow count from 10 down to 1. And what that's doing basically is that's giving a really nice steady signal. And not only on the lifeboats, on the Atlantic inshore lifeboats, we have radio direction finding equipment. So we can get a bearing of that signal. So the worst case scenario, you just keep going with that bearing till we find you. So a VHF is an extremely useful piece of kit from that point of view. Also allows us to talk to you on the way and get updates and things like that in terms of how you're doing. So a VHF, strongly recommended. The whole GMDSS, and I'm not going to spend very long on this, but there's a lot of things on the GMDSS system, which is a Global Maritime Distress and Signalling System. Or as somebody once told me, it's God made distress signalling simple. But basically what this means is that it's a whole integrated system, relies a lot on satellite communications, but everything is integrated and everything is, we're able to use a lot of different means to actually locate where you are. So a personal locator beacon would be part of this system, a VHF would be part of this system, and it makes life very, very easy for us if you've got these kind of things. Flares is often a hot topic for discussion in terms of how useful are they, and what are the advantages and disadvantages. There are advantages to flares, especially in terms of if you're using it in conjunction with somebody else. You'll see a photograph later on of some of them being deployed. But if you're talking to a lifeboat on a VHF, and you'll probably see the light even at night or whatever, or even during the day, you'll see the lifeboat, either the light, so you'll see the boat itself, probably before we'll see you. And if you've got flares and you tell us, well, I can see you, I'm going to let off a handheld flare, then we'll obviously see you immediately and we'll be able to come straight to your position. So flares are quite useful. The only, I suppose, the disadvantage of them is if it's all you've got, and we wouldn't recommend it's all you've got, but if it is all you've got, you're relying on somebody seeing it and reporting it and knowing what to do, and then knowing where they are and so on and so forth. So that's a bit of a problem, and they are kind of they're a one-use item. And getting rid of out-of-date flares is a bit of an issue as well. Really, the only effective way of doing it is you're buying new flares, you bring the old flares back to the supplier, and they'll take them off you. But a little bit about flares. They certainly have their uses, and especially in conjunction with other things. It's a fairly new mechanism, electronic visual distress signals, EVDs. They're not approved at the moment, but they are more and more in use, and they are quite effective. They effectively act like a red strobe. They're very, very bright, so they kind of mimic a red distress flare. The advantage, I suppose, is that you can turn it on and off, so you're not going to waste the battery. You can wait until you see somebody and then use it, and that kind of thing. But they're not as bright as flares, so they could get confused with background lights and things like that as well. But they're quite a useful thing to have as a backup to everything else. They're becoming more and more common. Mobile phone, for a long time, and I suppose the advice still stands to a certain extent, but for a long time we were always told, don't rely on a mobile phone as your primary means of raising the alarm. Now, over the years, the signal, particularly signal further out to sea, has become an awful lot better. There's been a lot of moves to increase the coverage in terms of directional masts and so on. And it is certainly getting an awful lot better. The other thing with paddling, unless you're going sort of on very long distances or heading out on very, very long trips, I probably shouldn't be doing that without all the rest of the equipment anyway, you're probably going to be fairly close to shore. So a mobile phone is a viable means. It certainly can be used. If you're using a smartphone, then there's obviously the phone is going to know where you are. Even if you got your location switched off, in an emergency, if you dial 999 or 112, the system can pick up your exact location, and that will be transferred to the emergency services along with the other data from the call. So it is quite useful from that point of view. And there have been a number of rescues recently around the Irish coast where somebody's got a signal for a short period of time, not being able to complete the phone call, but with the AMS, the automatic mobile service, it's possible to locate where that is. and the Coast Guard have been able to activate the emergency service in that area and have a pretty good idea of your exact location. So a mobile phone is quite useful. Obviously, they're not going to be totally, they're not water friendly, if you like, but carry them in a mobile pouch or a waterproof pouch or waterproof box or something like that would be quite useful. The other thing about a mobile is there's an app which I'm going to talk about in a little while as well, which actually is quite useful and can be loaded up onto your phone. Just a little bit about emergency calls on the mobile phone. First thing is dial 999 or 112 and ask for the Coast Guard. Coast Guard are going to deal with any incident around the water. So even if you're on the lakes or the Shannon, the navigable waterways or whatever, Coast Guard are probably the best people to contact. If they don't have a unit nearby, they'll contact the guards, but they'll be able to deploy the right kind of resources to you immediately. So anything on the water, ask for the Coast Guard. That's the first thing. Second thing is describe your location. So even if you're not overly familiar with to describe what you can see, describe where you left, anything like that, which is going to help, would be useful. Number of people involved in the group. If you've got a number of people, how many people are there? Describe the problem. So what is the problem? It could be, we capsized, we've got somebody in the water, or whatever it might be. Just describe what it is that's the issue, and then any other additional information. The one thing I would say is if you don't remember all of that in the heat of the moment, it doesn't really matter, because the person you'll be talking to in the Coast Guard basically has a form on the computer that they'll be filling up as they're talking to you, and if they're missing any information, they'll ask. So if you can't remember exactly what to say, don't worry, they'll prompt you. So that would be good from that perspective. Again, keeping the mobile phone protected. And the other thing, and this applies to all of the means of distress signaling, have it attached to you at all times. So think of it in terms of if it's in the boat, if it's in a hatch, can you reach it? If you get separated from the craft, if you get separated from your kayak, can you get back to it? So if you have it on your person, if your buoyancy aid has a lot of pockets on it, or carry a lanyard around your neck or whatever, that's the best way to deal with that and make sure you have everything when you need it. Satellite trackers, they are becoming more and more used. A lot of people use it for walking, trekking, hiking, that type of thing, and also using it on the water. Some things to consider around that. They're usually they can be expensive. You need to buy airtime. It's not run by the emergency services, but if you do, some of them will have functions to allow you to an SOS function. But you've got to transmit back to whoever the provider is. They'll then have to retransmit that to the Coast Guard Rescue services. So it'll be a little bit of potentially a delay there, but they are useful. The mobile apps, a lot of apps out there. Not all of them are designed for maritime use, but there is an app called SafeTracks, which is actually designed and created by a company down in Cork, which is really, really good. Effectively, what this app does is, at the moment, the app allows you to register your vessel. And you're also given the opportunity to register contact details for a point of contact ashore. How the system works is it polls you on a regular basis. It can track you where you're going. You can actually set up the whole thing you can actually put in a plan if you have a plan, and it'll track you. There is a sort of an SOS function there as well, in terms of there's a red button. Basically, if you press the red button, it sends a distress signal, and that will be picked up with the Coast Guard. In Ireland and in the UK, the Coast Guard actually have a separate terminal in MRCC, in Marine Rescue Coordination Centres, which is actually linked direct to SafeTracks. So if something comes in, they'll be able to track it, they'll be able to monitor it. The other thing is that if you're overdue and your next of kin or your shore contact contacts the Coast Guard and says, well, you're on SafeTracks, they'll immediately go to that terminal and look for you. So it is quite a useful thing as well. Currently being sort of administered on behalf of the leisure boating community by Irish Sailing. So if you go on their website and have a look, you can pick it up there. It's free to use, so quite good from that perspective. So that's calling for help. Wearing a PFD. I'm not going to spend an awful lot of time on this because I think it's fairly basic. There are a lot of different types out there. So what we'll suggest is that if you're new to paddling, get one that's designed for paddling. It'll be more comfortable. It'll be designed with that activity in mind. So it'll be more comfortable, a bit more room under the arms for paddling and so on. So they're designed for that. A lot of them will have a lot of pockets and that as well. So it's ideal for keeping things like your mobile phone, handheld VHF if you've got it, and whatever else you might need. If you're new to it and you haven't got it, if you're buying a kayak from a reputable kayak dealer, talk to them about getting a suitable buoyancy aid for the activity. They'll be able to give you a lot of help around that. For those of you that are thinking in terms of paddling with children, the smaller children in particular, there are specific buoyancy aids and life jackets designed for smaller children. Don't fall into the temptation of maybe just putting them in an adult one and tightening it up, because they're different shape and so on. And I won't go into the science of it, but the buoyancy is slightly different in terms of children's bodies are formed differently, so there's a bit more buoyancy in certain areas than others. But you can see there's for very small children an air and foam one where you actually manually blow it up, as well as having the built-in buoyancy. There's foam only, and that. The only one there, the CO2 one, probably not recommended for paddling, especially if it's an automatic, because with the automatic, obviously, paddling can be a wet sport, and if it gets wet, it inflates, and if you deflate it, then there's no way of re-inflating it unless you change the bottle. So something with permanent buoyancy in it would be recommended. But again, if you've got children and you're talking to your kayak provider around buoyancy aids, talk to them about children ones as well. One piece of advice I would give with children is bring them in and get them to fit it, because they come in different sizes and they do grow out of them rather quickly. So just making sure it's the right size for the right size child would be important. With regard to fit, it is a general thing with regard to any kind of buoyancy aids. It's too loose if you could basically if you can lift it up and lift it up over your ears, it's way too loose. If you can lift it up and it only comes up about an inch or so, then it's tight enough and it's fitted properly. So do make sure that you've got the right fit. If you end up with it being too loose and you end up in the water, you'll be floating possibly with water around there, and you'll be struggling to keep your head above the water, keep your mouth and nose above the water. So proper fit is absolutely essential from that perspective. Checking weather and tides. A couple of things we need to be aware of this, I suppose. Apart from the enjoyment, no point. Most people don't go out in bad weather because it's not going to be as much fun, unless you're specifically looking for specific conditions, and then you're probably properly trained and so on. You'll get weather forecasts online. Met Éireann is probably the go-to one in terms of the fact it's the national service, but there are lots of other sites out there as well. I'd recommend checking a few sites, just comparing them. There used to be a joke, but you can keep finding a site until you find a weather forecast you like. But some of them do have different features because they're catering for different activities and so on. So check out what you need, but do check the forecast. If you've got a VHF radio, the sea area forecast is repeated by the Coast Guard at regular intervals as well. So if you're out for a couple of hours, you'll probably be able to pick up on that as well. TV, local and national news and so on, and radio, they'll all do the forecast. So do pick up the forecasts. Tide as well is very, very important. Always check the tide for your area. Number of different ways of doing that. If you go to the Marine Institute website, you'll be able to check the tides online for any area and have a look at what the tides are. A lot of places will provide local tide tables. A lot of harbours will have tidal information, maybe the tide for the day up on local notice boards and so on, and there are other sites there as well. But there's a number of reasons why tides are important. one of the areas around, and we have a lot of them around the East Coast, particularly in areas where we've got a lot of sandbanks, but you've got a lot of overfalls. So what you'll see there in that diagram is, so there's a raised piece of ground under the water, so you get that water kind of streaming over. So you'll get almost like rapids on a river, which are called overfalls, and that will create a lot of really rough seas at times. So something to bear in mind. So you see everything just gets funneled through, so it's got to go up as well. The other thing that we need to consider as well is wind over tide. So if you've got the wind and the tide going in opposite directions, it's almost like sort of there's friction between the air and the water, and it will actually create rougher seas, which might make paddling a little bit more difficult. If you've got the wind with the tide going in the same direction, it tends to flatten out the water, so it's easier to paddle from that perspective. And also, just in gaps between headlands or between where you've got sort of narrower channels, you're obviously going to get much faster water. It kind of gets constrained, so it kind of flows very, very quickly through the gaps and things like that. So that's something to bear in mind. The other thing, just to bear in mind with regard to the flow, is again, and worth checking the tides. And if you're in an area you're not familiar with, ask somebody locally which direction is the tide flowing, because in some areas, you get, particularly when the tide really gets going, say 2 or 3 hours into the tide, you'll get very, very strong flow, and sometimes that can be very, very difficult to paddle against. Sometimes impossible to paddle against. It's just going too fast. So you kind of need to understand which way the tide is going, and perhaps the best way to look at that from the point of view of going for a trip is go with the tide. So you're either going from A to B, or if you're going down somewhere, you're going to go down with the tide and back with the next tide. Timing is important. But if you're in doubt, ask somebody local. They'll be able to tell you about where the tidal issues are in the area. Tell somebody where you're going, obviously quite important as well. There's a number of different things. We've spoken about the safe treks. That kind of gives, as well as knowing where you are and when you're supposed to be back, it also kind of tells you exactly where you are at any particular time. But the key thing in terms of letting somebody know is tell them where you're going, what time you hope to be back, and do remember to check in with them, or if you change your plans, let them know. If you come out of the water somewhere else, let them know. And the other thing, depending on if they're another paddler, they'll probably know. But if they're not, tell me, okay, if I'm due back at 6, if I haven't contacted you by 6:30, call the Coast Guard. Here's the number. It's dial 999. Call the Coast Guard and tell them where I am or where I was supposed to be. So just make sure that they know what to say. That's going to be important. I suppose, from the point of view of reporting an overdue person, it's at 999 112, ask for Coast Guard, who it is, what they were doing, where they were, what time they were left, what time they expected to return. That's kind of important, because if we know where you started and where you were going, or what time you were back, we kind of have a rough idea. We'll be able to work out how long it takes to get from A to B. So depending on, when you were last seen or whatever, it gives us an indication in terms of, at anywhere along that route, at any time, where's the likelihood of you drifting. So it kind of reduces the size of the area to somewhat that we might have to search from that perspective. Also describe what they're wearing, if they're with anybody, and so on, anything to help us identify exactly who it is we're looking for. And any known medical conditions could be important as well. If somebody's been in the water a while and they're maybe getting cold or whatever, that might exacerbate underlying medical conditions. Who knows? But at least if we know that there may be a problem, we've got trained first aiders on the boat. The winchman and the helicopter is a trained paramedic, so people will know what to do or what to expect if the situation is deteriorated. The last one, second last one, wearing appropriate kit. we've dealt with some of these already, but things like having a whistle, VHF, PLB, and PFD, and so on. Obviously, helmet would be important if you're going to be mucking around in rocks, things like that. Warm hat, if not, to keep the head warm, and so on. And wetsuit, dry suit, that type of thing. If any of you tuned into John Hayes's workshop a while ago, he gave some really good information on that. But certainly in the average Irish summer, shorts and a t-shirt is not appropriate wear. You will get cold an awful lot quicker than you expect out on the water. So having the appropriate kit is extremely important. One more discussion, but this is kind of something maybe you want to think about yourselves, or talk amongst your fellow paddlers. What's your one must-have piece of kit, whatever that might be, and things like that. And discuss what it is you need, and in certain conditions it might be there might be different things that are essential for different areas. The last one then, appropriate training. Obviously, we're here tonight courtesy of Canoeing Ireland. Do think about going on a recognised course with a recognised provider. As I said earlier, that's not only going to give you a lot of essential safety information and information about what to do, but it'll also help you enjoy the activity an awful lot more. So I think that's really, really important. So contact Canoeing Ireland if you're interested in getting training in terms of what training centres are in your area and what kind of training is available. Absolutely essential. Okay, so they're the 6 messages. So, technical issues here. So that's the main sort of thrust, I suppose, of this. In terms of what can happen to you, this is probably one of the biggest areas, I suppose. People don't understand what cold water shock is, but I think it's probably fair to say that pretty much everybody has probably suffered from cold water shock at some stage. If you've just been down to the water's edge and you put your big toe in and it's cold, you go, oh, that's cold. That's actually a very, very mild cold water shock. It's the first symptom. The first thing that will happen when you enter cold water, particularly accidentally and get full immersion, is you get a gasp reflex. So there's a, oh my God, help. So you get that gasp reflex. That's the first thing. One of the big problems with that is that if you end up under the water and you've got that gasp reflex, that can be a little bit present difficulties. That's why a personal flotation device is so important. It keeps you above the water. The other thing that will happen is that you'll get an increase in your heart rate. So the heart will start pumping an awful lot more, partly due to adrenaline, partly due to other effects of cold water. But effectively, you get that. That will cause a rise in blood pressure for a short period of time. And all of that can result in kind of an inability to swim, get a bit sort of discoordinated in terms of muscle use or whatever, and it can be difficult. So you see a lot of people thrashing around, and people who can't swim thrashing around for a bit beforehand. So the one thing, and it goes against the grain, I suppose, in terms of it goes against your instinct. But our message is, if you end up in the water accidentally, is just take a moment and float. So fight your instinct to swim. Just lean back in the water and take a deep breath. Keep your airway above the water. Open your body a little bit, a little bit like starfish. You just open your arms and legs and that kind of thing, and maybe just gently moving your arms and legs around gently, just to keep you afloat. And for a minute and a half, that will allow enough time for your breathing rate to come down, your heart rate to come down, and blood pressure to come back to a little bit more normal, and then you'll be able to hopefully be able to swim and help yourself a little bit more. So that's the thing. If you end up, just take that moment to sit back, relax, lie back, relax, and just get your breath back. That's quite important. So what happens when somebody calls for help? So this is where a lot of this kind of equipment will really come into its own, and you'll see why it's so important. Maybe somebody sees you could be waving, they could see a flare, and so on. So hopefully they will recognise that doesn't look right, and call 112 or 999. and ask for the Coast Guard. If it's a member of the public who's not familiar with it, the controller will normally kind of establish, oh, you're by the sea, it's somebody in the water, and they'll know it's Coast Guard. If it's another vessel out there that sees you, they'll probably get onto the Coast Guard using their VHF from channel 16 and raise the alarm that way. So that's the first thing that happens, is that maybe somebody will see you, but you are depending on somebody seeing you, and that's one of the difficulties. You're not sure until you actually see somebody coming for you. The preferable way is if you can call yourself, so either on a mobile phone calling 112, or if you've got a handheld VHF, call on channel 16. You can talk direct to the Coast Guard. You can get your information across. You can tell them where you are, and they'll probably keep talking to you, or they'll try and maintain contact with you. So that just makes it an awful lot easier in terms of being able to help you. But of course, just reiterating, that's only going to work if you've got your means of communication on your person. So if you can't reach it, if it's in the kayak, or if you get separated from the kayak and your means of communication is in there, then it's not an awful lot of good. So if you have it carried on you, then that's going to be with you, and you can use it. The next thing that happens then is, once the call comes into the Marine Rescue Coordination Centre, that's one of the guys in Dublin on the phone there. So whoever's the duty manager will take the 999 calls. Whoever's on the channel 16 watch will take the VHF calls. They'll take all the details. You can see there's a map. Somebody said that map of Ireland with the radio calls, the Marine VHF Communication Network. It's got a list of all of the Irish Coast Guard radio stations. So that can be downloaded from the Department of Transport site, Coast Guard, and you can download that. But it shows you that there's a good network there. So for VHF communication, there's pretty good coverage around the coast. And the other map there shows the lifeboat stations. There's a similar map, and probably not surprising, a lot of the Coast Guard coast units, the coastal rescue units, are in similar locations, so they fill up some of the gaps. So the Coast Guard will know where you are, and they'll be able to decide which assets are the best to deploy, and they'll immediately page the necessary units. In general terms, just to give you an idea how quickly everything happens, from the time the Coast Guard will press the, say for a lifeboat, from the time the Coast Guard will press the button to activate the pagers, the average time for a lifeboat to launch, from the pagers going off to crew getting down to the station, getting their kit on and getting the boat on the water, is about 8 minutes. So things happen very, very quickly once that happens. And similarly with Coast Guard units, they will deploy very, very quickly as well. And very often it's a combination of assets that the Coast Guard will deploy. Quite typically, for something that they think is quite serious, it'll be the nearest lifeboat, the nearest Coast Guard unit. Even if they can't do it, they may have eyes on from the cliff top or whatever, and they'll deploy a helicopter as well. As the scene unfolds, they may ask for more, or they may look for. They may send some of them back, depending on how serious it is or how things develop. But as a general rule of thumb, you'll probably find the Coast Guard will say, activate everything, and then we'll start calling back as we don't need them, which is a good thing from the point of view of, if you're in trouble, everything is coming, which is great. So you'll see, hopefully, typically the resources that will be used. Helicopters have fantastic use for getting to rather isolated places very, very quickly, and getting people to hospital extremely quickly. And obviously they can winch you out of the water and so on. A cliff rescue team. I've seen cliff rescue teams involved in kayak rescues where the kayakers or the paddlers have come ashore in an isolated beach, but actually they can't get off it. So cliff rescue team will go down and assist them out. Or you've got the lifeboat arriving as well. And very often it's a combination of various things. It wouldn't be, it might be an extreme situation, but it wouldn't be that uncommon for a Coast Guard team to be first on scene. But the easiest way to get somebody out is out by boat rather than back up a cliff. so transfer to a lifeboat. And if it's an emergency that requires immediate hospitalization, rather than waiting for a lifeboat to come back to port and transfer to an ambulance, it might be a case a helicopter arrives down and the person in distress is transferred from the lifeboat to the helicopter and brought to hospital. So it wouldn't be unusual for everybody to be involved in some way. So that's kind of what happens. I've got a kind of a question for you now in terms of, again, just kind of tying some of this together in terms of some of the equipment. The question is, could you last 20 minutes? And you're probably asking, why 20 minutes? What's 20 minutes? Well, the average time around the coast of Ireland and the UK for a lifeboat to actually reach somebody is 20 minutes. So that's the 8 minutes or so to get down to the station, get out, and most accidents happen fairly close in. So it's a fairly short transit time for the lifeboat to get there. Obviously, if it's further away, it's going to be longer, but that's the average. So can you last 20 minutes in the water? And I suppose from that perspective, there are certain things that will buy you time, and we've looked at these already. So having your buoyancy aid, that's going to help you keep afloat. It's going to be very hard to keep afloat without some kind of buoyancy for 20 minutes. You'll be rather tired if you're trying to tread water for 20 minutes. So your buoyancy aid will help you by that time. Having proper warm clothing will help you by that time. It'll keep you warmer and keep you in better condition. And being able to call for help rather than relying on somebody else, because you don't have that delay of somebody waiting for somebody to see you or somebody to report you overdue. You'll be able to call for it immediately. Just the other thing in terms of just coming back to the buoyancy aid, the other thing as well, which I think is extremely important, and that is trying to stay with your craft, because obviously that's going to be extra buoyancy as well. Plus, it makes it easier for us, a lot easier to spot a kayak in the water than a head bobbing up and down. So makes it easier. There are things that will help us as well, help the RNLI, help the Coast Guard in terms of when we're looking for you. Having that means of communication, because if we've got that communication and we can keep that communication open with you, it can help. We had a situation with a stand-up paddleboard year before last where conditions and visibility were pretty poor. The guy could actually hear us and saw us on one occasion, but we couldn't see him. But we managed to get the communications going again with him, and he was able to describe where he felt we were in relation to him, because he could see glimpses of us every now and then, and from that information we were able to actually get in and get him. Being seen is very important, so wearing bright colours would be good. Anything like that which would help. Having reflective tape on your on things like on your kayak or canoe as well will be extremely useful from our point of view. You might not intend to be out at night, but it can happen that you get into difficulty by the time help arrives. It's starting to get dark, or if we can't find you, we're searching and so on. And but being seen is vital. So having a flashlight with you, even if you're only going out during the day, just in case, having that reflective tape. Give you an example in terms of the effectiveness of the reflective tape. We were out for a search in Wicklow a couple of years ago. We knew that we had comms, but we couldn't see anything, and we ended up using a parachute flare, an illumination flare, which basically provides quite effective illumination over a reasonably large area. And once we deployed that, we were able to pick up, we saw something that looked bright and flashing about a mile away, and that was the reflective tape on the life jacket. So that was quite important from our point of view. So being seen. Stay with your craft, or if you were all raft up together, the larger you make the target for us, the better. It's much easier to see. As I say, you can imagine looking for a hedge the size of a football, particularly if you've got any waves. Whereas you've got a couple of kayaks rafted together, or you're with your kayak, and it's an awful lot easier to see. So hopefully that will kind of help you in terms of what to think about. And all going well, if you've got all that kind of stuff and you've had the means of communication, but if you do get into difficulty, we're looking at a successful outcome, which is what we all want out of it. Of course, having listened to this, you'll probably be a little bit better aware, better informed, and hopefully you won't get into that kind of difficulty in the first place. But if you do, you'll know what to do, which would be ideal. Just from our perspective, if there's anything from the point of view of additional information, additional advice that you're looking for, we are contactable. Best place to start is if you go to our website, rnli.org. If you click on safety, and underneath safety, then you've got a selection of different activities, and you can select paddling and get whatever you need from that. So I hope that was of some use. Thank you very much. So if there are any questions, I'm sure we can take that now.